Welcome, everyone, to Nerd of the Rings. Today, we have a special guest with us, director Jon Spira, director of The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee, the legendary Christopher Lee that you've no doubt heard all kinds of stories about because everyone seems to have a story about Christopher Lee. Jon, thank you so much for bringing more stories of Christopher Lee to the public awareness and for joining us today as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, I'm curious, Jon, how did you come to direct this film about Christopher Lee? What brought this project about?
It's always like a weird convergence of a bunch of things that you don't expect. Um, Me and my producer Hank, all the films we make are basically kind of about kind of pop culture or about
Mm,
cinema mainly. And what tends to happen is you've got 1,000 ideas, and then the one you least expect suddenly just kind of happens. So we've been talking about Christopher Lee for a long time. Uh, Firstly, because of his autobiography, which I read like 6 years ago.
mm.
There's kind of three. He's put out three versions of his
Oh,
autobiography,
wow. Yeah,
but it's kind of all the same book, kind of jumbled, kind of
gotcha.
Um, and he put one out right around the time of Lord of the Rings called The Lord of Misrule. And I read a lot of autobiographies, and I was just really surprised by it. It revealed Christopher Lee is one of those very solid characters who you kind of think you've got the measure of.
Mm, yeah.
He seems so kind of confident and kind of erudite
Mm, yeah.
and I was really surprised to read his autobiography and find it to be quite self-deprecating
Mm,
and quite honest. Um, so that I enjoyed that greatly. And then me and Hank had made a TV series called Real Britannia. That was the last project we'd worked on, and that was the whole modern history of British cinema as a kind of 4-part TV show, and obviously that was like a huge undertaking. And
mm.
when it finished, we all just kind of collapsed, everyone who worked on it. And I had a few weeks off, and it was one of those rare moments where I've got literally nothing I have to do. So I'm just on the sofa going, I don't, what shall I do? And I started watching old episodes of This Is Your Life, the show This
Mm,
Is Your Life.
yeah.
And I was just watching loads of them, and I really enjoyed it. And then they're all on YouTube, and YouTube just said, next up, Christopher Lee. And I was like, wow, I'd love to see Christopher Lee's This Is Your Life.
Yeah.
And it started, and the thing that struck me was that he was terrified from the beginning to the end. He was
Oh.
not having a good time. The camera was close in on his face, and he was panicked.
Mm,
Part of which I understood from having read his book. There were certain guests they had on, like his old wartime buddies, who told
yeah.
a kind of hilarious story about a joke they played on him, which in his book he'd actually described as one of the worst things that ever happened to him.
Oh my gosh.
So, he was just under stress, and you could see him being under stress. And I was so interested. I was watching him and just thinking, this is a guy who has controlled his own narrative for so long
Mm,
that when someone else is in charge of telling his story, you can see that he's really worried about it. And that was just a little kind of light bulb over my head. It was like, he's an interesting person. And
yeah.
having read the book, those two things made me kind of say to Hank, I think there's something there. I think he's someone we could make a movie about.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was as simple as we were actually trying to get other stuff off the ground, and one of our distributors in the US basically said, we're looking for uh, documentaries about kind of strong, iconic people.
Hmm.
And I said Christopher Lee, or Hank said Christopher Lee, and they said yes. And so it was that simple. We
Yeah.
got started that quickly.
Wow. And now I'm curious, what was the prank that they played on him?
Oh, it was horrible. It was kind of they basically, and I'm going to get it wrong, but essentially what it was that he was very precocious and he could talk a lot of languages, and because he came from kind of Italian aristocracy, I think he struggled to fit in with kind of the working class,
Mm,
kind of army, air force kind of situation.
yeah.
So I think he was teased a lot. Firstly, people were racist against him
Mm,
because he was from Italian background,
yeah.
so he experienced a lot of racism. But secondly, because he'd had like a kind of public school education,
Yeah.
they teased him for kind of being posh but not being like an officer. So he at one point they told him that he was being sent on a secret special mission, and that he had to go and wait on the runway, and that a plane was going to pick him up. And
Oh
they
my
basically
gosh.
made him wait on the runway for like 4 hours in the freezing cold,
Oh my gosh.
where no plane was ever going to come. You know,
Yeah.
they were
Wow.
just, just mocking him. It was cruel.
Wow.
He had a lot of that. It's funny. People think of him as the kind of proto kind of English gentleman,
Yeah.
but the truth is that he was from Italian background, and he experienced a lot of racism. I mean, throughout his life, but certainly early on in his film career, he struggled to get parts because the people that the phrase he kept using was that people said he was too tall and foreign looking. He couldn't
Wow.
work. It's
Yeah.
weird, but now we see him in a completely different way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And he's such an interesting person, like you said. Um, every person that I've had the pleasure of talking to or interviewing here on the channel that was involved in those Lord of the Rings films, whether it's an actor, a producer, even people just like writing books about those films, that happen to cross paths with Christopher Lee. They all have at least one Christopher Lee story. And I've never encountered that, there's not a singular person, other person from those films that seems to have made such an impact on every single person they came in contact with.
I think he was a genuine kind of character, and I think that, I mean, firstly, he is someone. By the time he was in Lord of the Rings, that was, I mean, it wasn't even the end of his career, but it was towards the end of his career, towards the end of his
Yeah.
life. He always said that he would never retire and that he wanted to die with his boots on. So
Mm.
he kept working until the end. He had, the day he died, there was a film role he still had a film role he was supposed to be performing like the next day.
Oh,
So
wow.
he worked until the very, very, very end. But he's one of the only people in the history of cinema to have a career as long and as varied.
Yeah.
It spanned 8 decades. He
Which
worked.
is wild. It
It's
is
insane
wild. Yeah.
when you think about the people he worked with as well. He worked with Errol Flynn. He worked with Billy Wilder, Orson Welles, Mario Bava, Jess Franco, Martin Scorsese, John Landis, Joe Dante, Peter Jackson, Steven
Mhm.
Spielberg. He is all over 80 years of cinema.
Yeah.
So I think by the time Lord of the Rings came around, anyone who knew about cinema, he was a genuine living legend. I don't think
Yeah.
there are many of those.
Yeah.
He genuinely was a touchstone for so much of cinema history. So I think, and I think he was aware of this, and
Yeah.
I think he was very good at kind of manipulating his image, and I think he was quite good at giving people a satisfying experience with him.
Yeah.
Because he'd come up through the ranks himself. So he was, I mean, he snuck onto the set of Olivier's Hamlet. That was the first film he was in. And so he was around Olivier, so he had been through the hero worship phase himself.
Right.
And but on top of that, he was just an incredibly nice human being. He was truly egalitarian. He would talk to anybody. He treated everybody with courtesy and with respect. So yeah, I think even if there's also that thing where sometimes when you meet truly famous people, no matter
Mm.
what your interaction with them, you have to turn it into an anecdote.
Yeah. Right.
Because otherwise, what have you got? So I kind of think that he might have been a victim of that as well.
Yeah.
That's why everybody's got a story, is because you have to have a story. You can't just say I met him. You have to have
Yeah, exactly.
a moment.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 8 decades of, and this isn't just, like bit parts and stuff. Like, this is, like you said before we started recording, this is 8 decades of relevancy, like, of him being,
The
uh
first the first
yeah.
10 years, he was very much a kind of jobbing actor.
Yeah, yeah.
But he was in some very big films.
Big, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he didn't really kind of make his name until the Hammer period.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, as soon as that came along, it was
It was
supercharged.
from there on, yeah. And I read recently, I can't recall where I read this, but that we have that game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, and Christopher Lee destroys
Oh,
Kevin Bacon when it comes to connection. I think it was 2.6 degrees is like,
that's what I've heard.
the average from anyone that you can name. 2.6 steps is the average to get to Christopher Lee, which is just
And
wild.
I think you'd have to be starting with a very obscure point to get to 2.6.
Yeah,
I think he's generally about 1 point away from everybody.
that's wild.
I
I
mean,
will say the one thing, if you have the chance, folks, you should just like go scroll his IMDb because it's forever long for one thing, but it's just extraordinary. The one complaint I have about IMDb is when you start searching Christopher Lee, it auto populates, and the movie it comes up with under his name is Attack of the Clones, and I can't help but think of all the films. It doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings, I guess, but come on, Attack of the Clones out of all of them.
I wonder, do you think that was the most financially successful? Is that why it goes to that?
Oh,
It might be that.
hmm,
He was very proud of that, though. I mean, I was surprised, like, kind of watching and reading later interviews with him. He was thrilled to be part of Star Wars. I mean, it wasn't
yeah.
Lord of the Rings was his
Oh, right,
long
yeah,
dream. I mean, nothing compares to that. But he was so thrilled to be involved with Star Wars. So
yeah,
yeah, he wouldn't have complained about that association.
right. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I
There's a
still think it should be Lord of the Rings, but I'm biased.
there is a spoiler that I'm not going to reveal to you.
Okay.
You and your people will have to watch the movie.
Mm,
But we all know that Lord of the Rings was one of the most important things in his entire life.
yeah,
What we don't know, and what was revealed in a very special interview that we did in the film for the film, which is in the film, is that Lord of the Rings played a significant part in his death.
really?
Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay.
As far as I know, this information has never come out anywhere else. And while we were interviewing his son-in-law,
Mm,
this beautiful interview, and it was very emotional. And I I never pushed too hard on the
yeah,
interviews. I like the interviewees to lead the interviews to a degree. And I was, I asked him about the kind of circumstances of his death. Like, I knew how he had died, but I
yeah.
asked him about the day, about the situation, and he went deep. He told us the whole story from his point of view,
Wow.
and I was very surprised. And actually, the irony, one of the ironies of Christopher Lee's life, and we've called the film "The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee,"
Yeah.
because actually a hallmark of his career was that he died in most of the films he was in.
Right.
He died 1,000. He's in 300 films. I think he died in at least 250 of them. Really, he had every kind of death imaginable, but his actual death was kind of quite beautiful.
Mm,
He was one of these people, these rare people to have what you would describe as a good death.
mm.
Um, and Lord of the Rings comes into it in a way that you would not expect at all, which is truly beautiful. So it was,
Wow.
he it was so important to him. It was so present from when the stories were first published. He engaged with them immediately.
Yeah.
Where they were published in parts. He was reading the
As
movie
they came out. Yeah.
installment as they came out. He read them every single year, and they got him through. I mean, we go into it in the film. They got him through difficult times. Lord of the
Mm,
Rings was something that he went to when he was feeling weak. They went to when he needed support. Um, and it played a role throughout his whole life in just the most amazing way. And of course, he was the only person involved with the whole Lord of the Rings production to have met Tolkien.
right. Yeah.
And there's a whole section. The way we made the film, we wanted it to be kind of as strange and delightful as his whole career.
Yeah.
So the film is in kind of these chapters, and we hired a whole load of different animators and illustrators and all kinds of thing. And obviously, we used the puppet, which we have,
Yes.
who narrates the film,
Right.
voiced by Peter Serafinovich. Darth Maul does the
Yeah.
Christopher Lee. So the film is in these sections, and one of the sections is basically guest directed by Dave McKean, who is a very famous illustrator and filmmaker, in fact.
Yeah.
He worked on Neil Gaiman's Sandman. He did the covers for Sandman. He's done 100 things. He's an incredible guy. And we just gave him free rein. And the section that he chose to bring to life is the story of Christopher Lee meeting Tolkien.
Mm.
And he went all out. He filmed it on a set. He had these huge masks. He combines kind of live action with animation. He scored the whole thing himself. It's like 7 minutes in the middle of the movie. It's absolutely stunning. So
Wow.
yeah, like it's very Lord of the Rings is. It was kind of front and center in Christopher Lee's life. So we try and keep it that way in the documentary as well.
Yeah. Wow. Now another, you mentioned a couple folks involved with the film, and then also folks you've interviewed. Now we revealed this on the Nerd of the Rings social media and here on YouTube and everything. But for those who haven't seen it, who might be joining us, I want to share a clip of a very special interviewee that you had join for the purpose of the documentary.
Christopher was someone that we had in mind for Saruman, not just because of his background and because I had grown up, loving Christopher Lee's movies. He was perfect for that role. There's no doubt about it. You'd be hard-pressed to find another actor that would be better at bringing Saruman to life. What surprised us is that it wasn't just a conversation where we're trying to persuade him to do the role that we wanted him for. He was super enthusiastic because he was a huge Tolkien fan. And then he said, you'd be very happy to do Saruman, of course, which is great. He says, but did you ever consider me for Gandalf? Which we hadn't done. And it put us on the spot a bit, because I said, really? He said, yes, I would much prefer to play Gandalf, And it was like, and I understand why, because Gandalf was pushing him as an actor, whereas Saruman was something, everyone knows that he could do Saruman. He's perfect for that. So he said, I prepared a scene. Can you film me? I'd like to do Gandalf. I'd like to show you. He actually auditioned for us, which is the last thing we wanted Christopher Lee to do, audition for us for the role of Gandalf. He was good as Gandalf, but better as Saruman. And what we actually ended up realizing is that we had other possibilities for Gandalf. There were other actors that in different ways could do Gandalf, and we were talking to Ian, and he would be certainly top of the list. But there is no other actor we thought of that could do Saruman. I mean, Christopher was our only choice.
Wow. I love that clip, and I can only imagine the feeling of going to Christopher Lee and having to tell him, thank you for submitting this this audition that, like how often did Christopher Lee by this time have to audition for roles? I'm sure not very often, if at all. And for him to insist on auditioning and then for you to still have to tell him, thanks, but we still want you to play Saruman.
Do you know, there's something that interests me about that is I don't think it actually made it into the final film, but it was quite well documented amongst his friends that he had a very acute jealousy of Sean Connery.
Mm.
And early on in Lord of the Rings, Sean Connery was the first choice for Gandalf. He was
right.
the Jackson had wanted. And in fact, I don't know if it's you'd probably know better than me, but the deal that Sean Connery was offered would have netted him literally millions of pounds.
Yeah, it's insane.
He would have been given backhand, and he just didn't really understand it, and he'd already kind of retired and kind of didn't want it. So I always wonder if there's a little bit in the back of his mind of this was the moment where he might have been able to trounce Sean Connery.
Right.
But I mean, what's interesting, what came out of Peter's interview quite repeatedly, like in that moment, is how surprised he was as a filmmaker by these kind of insecurities that Christopher kind of displayed to him. And he talks a few times about that, about being surprised by Christopher's behavior. He told a really nice story. It'll be on the Blu-ray. We're going to put pretty much the whole Peter Jackson interview as an extra feature on the Blu-ray because there's so much stuff in there. And obviously, when you make a 2-hour film, you have to condense.
Cut. Yeah.
And the first thing that go tend to be like the long anecdotes because no time for them.
Right.
But he told a beautiful anecdote where he was basically out for dinner with Christopher Lee, and they were talking about what Peter Jackson was up to, and at the time he was directing the Tintin movie with Spielberg.
Yeah.
And Christopher Lee goes, "Oh, I worked with Spielberg once. You know, he did 1941, the John
Right.
Dan Aykroyd film." And Peter goes, "Oh, well, we should call him." And Christopher goes, "No, he wouldn't remember me." It's just like, you're Christopher Lee. Like, how can you not understand? You're Christopher Lee.
Right.
So he phoned him up, and Spielberg didn't answer, but he left a message saying, "I'm out for dinner with Christopher right now. We were just remembering it." And then 5 minutes later, there's like a noise on his phone, and Spielberg has left wherever he was and gone into the car park and recorded a video especially for Christopher Lee saying, like, you know, I would love to see you again. Like, you know, you were so important. You know, I'm such a huge fan of your work.
Yeah.
He was genuinely kind of moved and kind of confused and surprised about this. He never really got it. I mean, he had a very difficult relationship with the work that made him famous. The stuff from Hammer, from the kind of the 50s and 60s, from the association with kind of horror movies. He had a difficult relationship with it. And Peter Jackson was one of the people who basically had to sit him down and say, you're taking this too far. You need to understand that people really like it.
Yeah.
And when you kind of poo-poo it kind of publicly, you're not doing yourself any favors. You know, it's and also that actually this stuff is great. People really enjoyed it. People really kind of care about it. But for Christopher Lee, I mean, really, like, you know, the beautiful thing about his story and about his career is that he did a lot of bad films. You know, he did 300 films, and he knew that over half of them were terrible.
Yeah.
Although he was always good in them, and he always gave it his all.
Right.
The very worst movie, he is still always eminently watchable. But at the end of his career, all of a sudden, he had this Indian Summer, this explosion, and suddenly he was working with Tim Burton repeatedly. He was working with Scorsese.
Yeah.
He was doing the Star Wars films. He was doing the Lord of the Rings films, and it was a really kind of happy ending.
Yeah.
To a journeyman career.
Yeah. Now, so JD in the chat, he brought up a good question. There's so many stories about Christopher Lee, and like you see those posts, I'm sure we've all seen them on you know, social media, where it's like this big long list, and if any of us had 2 or 3 of them, you know, true about us, you'd be like, wow, what a crazy life. And this is a list of like, you know, 15 things, and it just seems almost too crazy to believe. In the process of, you know, doing this documentary, did you, you know, find confirmation or any that turned out to not be true that you've seen, or is it all true?
It's all rooted in truth.
Okay.
I'll say that. It's all rooted in truth. Some of the weird stuff is absolutely completely true.
Yeah.
He witnessed the last ever guillotining in Paris.
Yeah.
He met the 2 men who finally killed Rasputin. He was the one. So we had a great consultant on, someone called Jonathan Rigby, who was Christopher Lee's official biographer while he was alive. So he knew all the stuff, and he's got because he hates seeing that kind of top 10 list of So he created a top 10 list of Christopher Lee lies, and the thing that annoys him the most is that people always say that he was the basis for James Bond.
Yeah.
And the truth is that he was first cousin by marriage to Ian Fleming.
Yeah.
And they were close, and they played golf together, and they knew each other very well. And it is also true that Christopher Lee had a career in what you would call the Secret Service.
Right.
And he certainly did missions as a spy. But it's certainly Rigby says that it's just not true. Bond was just not based on him at all. But the thing was that Christopher Lee wasn't stupid. So he never, why get in the way of a good story?
Right. Yeah.
Although I think he never said Bond was based on me. When people said to him, "Bond, I hear Bond was based on you," he wasn't quick to say no.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, so that's kind of how that kind of happened. But the thing you've got to remember is that back in the day, I mean, when he got into film, when he got into being an actor, which was kind of the 1940s, the early 1940s, it was not acting was not what it is now. It was considered disreputable.
Yeah.
Like by especially if you came from an aristocratic background, it was like gypsies, travelers, and thieves kind of thing. So those early film actors in particular, they all had lives before it. It
Yeah.
wasn't weird. And he came out of, firstly, he was descended from genuine aristocracy. So that puts you in a lot of interesting situations anyway.
Right.
Secondly, he went through the Second World War. So he did have a whole life before he even thought about being an actor. And so it's kind of, it's funny that people think that's so crazy. All these things are kind of so crazy.
Yeah.
But he was an interested cultural person. Look, he could speak. I don't even know how many languages. I think probably 6 languages fluently, which was incredible.
Yeah.
And he did strange things. One of the weirdest things about his story is that in his 90s, he got the world record for being the oldest person to enter the Billboard chart. Right? Because in his 90s, he decided he was going to get into heavy metal music.
Right. It's wild. Yeah.
He 2 really credible heavy metal albums.
Yeah.
They're still talked about. He won a very significant award, the Kerrang Award. There's a beautiful moment in the film where they talk about that, because we get his kind of band back together to talk about the heavy metal. And he was given an award by Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. And they spent the day together, and we got this really beautiful footage that's never been seen before of them hanging out. And he said to Tony Iommi, I know that you created heavy metal, or Black Sabbath created heavy metal. And Tony Iommi said, well, we were inspired by your films. He was like, what? And he was like, yeah, it was those were the films we were watching. And Black Sabbath, the title, comes from a Mario Bava film, and Christopher Lee made loads of Mario Bava.
Wow.
So he was kind of amazed to realize that it all kind of connects up.
Yeah.
He had a long life. He was an alert, interested, cultural guy.
Yeah.
So I think when you look at anyone's life, there are a lot of kind of interesting conflicts. But you're right, it makes for an amazing list, and it keeps even 10 years almost after his death, it keeps him alive on social media.
Right. Yeah.
Always popping up.
Yeah, he is. It's wild. Now you mentioned the animated section about Sir Christopher meeting J.R.R. Tolkien. That's another one of those things where I'm curious how much is kind of the embellishment or the legend versus what happened. The big one is, did Tolkien promise Christopher Lee he could play Gandalf in a film? That's the one I've always had trouble with. Okay. Yeah.
No, never. No.
He met him. That's what my understanding was that he met him once. It was kind of like a chance meeting. It wasn't like this big.
It was a chance meeting
ordeal.
And also Christopher Lee, he wrote about it very movingly in his autobiography. It was a chance meeting, and he was happy just to be in his presence. He didn't be a fanboy, so he actually didn't really talk with him much. It was a group of people. He was in the group of people, and it was just a meaningful moment for him.
Yeah.
So yeah, he didn't. No, none of that. That's all crap.
Okay, well, good. We've set the record straight then, because I've seen that posted so many times, and I'm like, I'm not sure that that's true. I've not seen that from a reputable source. Yeah. So now we know.
So much information.
Is there anything, going into directing this film that, that's as you're going through the process that surprised you? I'm sure there's probably numerous things, but is there one thing that, you look at this person who, pretty much everyone knows had an incredible life, but even going into it knowing that, was there still things that surprised you about him?
I mean, my biggest surprise is always to do with emotions. It's always to do with
Mm.
feeling. And I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but like what I enjoyed most coming out of this film was that I feel that we really kind of humanized him.
Mm.
You know, what surprised me is that Christopher Lee is someone who had such deep insecurities until the day he died. I mean, that's something that fascinated me. The biggest surprise I had, again, I know this is a terrible way to talk because I don't want to give spoilers because I want people to see the film and to be surprised.
Right.
The biggest surprise for me was a piece of footage that we found. First of all, it surprised me that it even existed, which was what's known as a piece of off-air footage. So he had been doing a press interview, and this was the outtakes. Okay, this was after the camera basically kind of stopped rolling, stuff that hadn't been released to the public. There was an amazing moment which showed him, I don't want to say it showed him in a bad light, but it was an unguarded, unexpected moment of sudden emotion from him. And against a journalist, he basically loses his temper. I was amazed when we found this, and then I was 5,000 times amazed that it got licensed to us.
Wow.
I was like, okay, it exists, but we're never going to get to use this in the film. And they licensed it to us.
Wow.
And it comes right before he dies in the film. Can you hear the cat meowing?
A little bit. Yeah, that's okay.
So I've got the door shut, so it's going crazy. So I was really surprised they licensed it to us. And it's one of those moments as a filmmaker where you get all of the interviews. You know, you get great stuff from interviews, you get great stuff from research. So you feel like you know the person, you feel like you kind of have an insight. But it's very rare that you find a piece of footage which gives you pure insight. There's a kind of, I mean, it's not similar, but in the making of the Lord of the Rings, I think it's the first one, there's a bit where he loses his temper with Peter Jackson because he can't walk up the stairs in his costume. You know, and it's so rare that stuff comes out where you see people actually kind of losing their temper and actually kind of revealing, not being nasty in any way, but revealing their frustrations.
Yeah.
And this one bit of footage revealed his deepest held frustration from his whole career. And it happens in an instant. And you go, when you watch it, you go, ooh. And whenever we show people the film, they go, oh.
Wow.
It's a real moment. Go, oh, like we shouldn't be watching this. This is very real.
Right.
So that was the biggest surprise for me. And you'll know it when you see it in the film. And it's just a killer moment. It's so great.
Wow.
And it ends up almost being like the punctuating moment of telling his story. Because really the point that I'm trying to make while I'm telling his story is, you know, we're all insecure. We all have weaknesses. We all look at our lives and wish we'd done things differently or wish we'd been like that person. And I think it's really helpful when so many documentaries kind of mythologize their subjects and reinforce the idea that they're not human.
Right.
I love going the other way. I love seeing a film which I come out of going, oh, wow, you know, even he felt like that at certain times. You know, even he had his kind of struggles with things. And Christopher Lee is such a kind of strong character.
Yeah.
I think it's really heartening to kind of go, yeah, and he had bad days just like us, and he had regrets and he had frustrations. I mean, what's incredible to me is that he took them all into his 90s.
Yeah.
There's an amazing bit with John Landis, who's the director of, you know, Blues Brothers and Animal House, and he was a friend of Christopher's for decades. And there's a point where he talks about visiting him, and he would have been in his 80s, and he's complaining about his career, and he just goes, like, you're in Star Wars and you're in Lord of the Rings. It's time to relax. You're fine.
Right.
But even then, you know, he had his frustrations, and I think that's really beautiful. I think that's the kind of humanity that the film brings to him.
Yeah. Now, he may have had emotions like the rest of us, but the rest of us don't have puppets made of us. So I think it's about time we address. People have been commenting in the live chat about the puppet in the room here. So tell us about our third person on our on our stream here.
Well, he is the narrator of our film. He is Christopher Lee, a version of Christopher Lee. He was built by Arch Model Studios, who are based in London, and they do all of Wes Anderson's puppets for like The Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox and the alien at the end of Asteroid City. And they done a lot of Tim Burton's things. They did all of Frankenweenie. They were all on The Corpse Bride. And what we have is he's about I'd say he's almost kind of 2 foot tall. It's hard to fit him in. You can see he's on a big kind of wooden frame.
Yeah.
He's a marionette. He's a fully articulated string puppet. He has to be operated by at least 2 professional puppeteers, of which I am not, so I'm scared to keep touching him. You can see that he's got strings coming out of his head, and because even his face is articulated by strings. But there's also, I'll turn him around for close-ups.
Oh yeah.
Fit a trigger in. And so this can kind of control his head for close-ups, and we've got a mouth control, so that's kind of he talks. I can control the eyes, but I can't quite. It's weird. I've not quite learned how to do it properly. I feel like I'm putting random strings inside, which scares me.
Yeah. Don't
there's
push.
A secondary controller here.
Oh
which
wow.
just controls his eye. Yeah, kind of blink, or you can have him kind of widen his eyes, narrow his eyes, and at great expense. My producer was very angry with me because while the puppet was being done, and obviously we're an independent film, so we didn't have a huge amount of money.
Right.
I said to him, if the eyebrows don't work, then it's not Christopher Lee.
Right.
Eyebrows, which can go down and make him very angry.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So every single piece of this puppet is handmade by them, including the clothes. They even make the fabric in-house, because when you see full-size fabric on smaller puppets, it looks kind of weird.
Yeah.
You have to make it at a smaller kind of scale.
Oh my gosh.
So even the houndstooth, which he wore a lot in his private life, was handmade by them. Every part of him is sculpted. You can see how his hands. He's got a few sets of hands that are kind of interchangeable. Even his shoes. Let's see if I can get them up. Even his shoes are handmade and perfect. They're absolutely kind of spot on. His hair, they made the wig for him. It's incredible. And working with them was great. They would send a big envelope just of chunks of hair.
Yeah.
Which hair are we going with? And yeah, it was a huge decision to try and work out, because obviously he spanned 8 eras. It's like, which Christopher Lee do you show?
Right. Yeah.
So in the end, I decided I felt that like late 60s, early 70s Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm.
He's slightly grey at the sides, kind of the Scaramanga kind of kind of era. There was for a while he was going to be in a white suit, but actually kind of decided that we'd go with the houndstooth because he wore that in his private life so much. So yeah, he's kind of an amalgam of many different kind of eras.
Yeah.
While we were shooting, he was always operated by at least 2 puppeteers. And they had a technical team on standby the whole time as well, because the strings will go through his hair and knock his hair out of joint, and it was and we were asking a lot of he's very physical in the film, and there are scenes where he dances and there are scenes where he falls and stuff, and so yeah, it was he had a whole team around him, and it was amazing fun, and he's beautiful.
Yeah.
The guys I was telling you earlier that I secretly hoped that he would come and live with me at the film. And Andy Gent, who's the guy who runs Archival Studio, who designed him, basically kind of said to me, you don't want him. like believe me, like we can take care of him, and you can't. And it was only when I've got it for 2 weeks for doing podcasts and stuff in the house, and I hate having him in the house because it's so delicate, and I'm so scared that something's going to happen to him. You know, I mean, there's at least kind of 20 strings going up to the sky here,
Wow.
and you know, you don't want him getting tangled up. You don't.
Yeah.
So, but they love him so much that, and in fact, they were supportive. They were amazing the whole way through making this film. They let us film in their studios and stuff, and they hooked us up with these great puppeteers. And they've just got a new boardroom kind of built, and they've got 4 plinths. Andy was telling me, and he is going to be one of the 4.
Oh, cool.
Kind of things in a plinth, sat in a plinth. So that makes me very happy. So he's going to be very well loved, and he's just the best. It's wonderful. And like I said, we got Peter Serafinovich to voice him.
Yeah. Now that's an interesting, it's an interesting approach to have, the person who you're doing a documentary of who has passed on, to have someone come on and voice as Christopher Lee. That's an interesting choice.
It was, it was complicated because I had originally wanted to do him in deep fake came about at the beginning of the process, so it was being talked about a lot, and that was something I was interested in doing. I was very interested in. We'd found some old footage of him introducing an old TV show where he was like sat in a chair, and it seemed like it would be very easy to kind of digitally manipulate his face to say what we wanted him to say. So we did a whole load of tests with that kind of thing, and it just looked creepy, and it looked like we were faking it. It looked like people would watch it and think, oh, they found footage of him talking about himself.
Yeah.
So we wanted to kind of step away from that, and especially because he the thing that I play with in the film is that the puppet tells his story. Okay. And as I said earlier, he controlled his story. But his story wasn't necessarily the truth. So what we do is we have the puppet telling his truth, which is all based on his writing and hundreds of interviews that the BFI, the British Film Institute, supplied me with for research. So everything he says in the film is verifiable, something that he had expressed as truth at some point in his life.
Yeah.
But then the interviews, which are all with people who knew him really well, really close to him, the interviews kind of gently contradict it or give you another perspective into it.
Yeah.
So I really like that idea. And we kind of opened the very opening of the movie actually shows Peter in the studio getting the voice right. And as soon as he gets the voice, the lights come on and you see the puppet. And it's us saying, this is not, this is something different. We're not
right. Yeah.
That he is narrating this film. It's a weird it's a weird conceit, but it works really well,
Yeah.
And we didn't know it was going to work right until, me and Hank often have these discussions where we come up with crazy ideas. And, I think Hank was the one who basically said, what about a string puppet?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, we're looking at paper puppets at one point as well. And he was like, what about marionette? And it was like, okay, let's investigate that. And until we were on that soundstage filming it, we genuinely didn't know if it was going to work or if it was just going to be stupid or kind of crazy. It fits into the crazy of the film. It's a really, it's a delightfully whimsical, weird, artistic kind of rendering of his life.
Yeah. Well, and it looks really good in the teaser too. Yeah.
We've got the best camera team, and we had so much fun, and it was so, we used the simplest tricks to do the most effective kind of stuff. We had smoke machines and played about with that, different lighting behind them. At the end, we wanted to do a lot of rear projection. I had lots of plans for rear projection because we had such great archive that I wanted him to kind of interact with. And it wasn't working. The projectors weren't strong enough, and it was this kind of horrible moment. And so we just bought a TV. We just bought a massive TV and just stuck it on the stage. And the puppeteers stood behind it and hung him in front of it, and it worked really well. And then get the TV back to Amazon the next day. And so it's all it was really simple stuff, but the puppeteers were so creative
Mm.
themselves. So much fun collaborating with them. And we've got the kind of, we've pretty much had the same crew the whole way kind of through our careers.
Yeah.
My camera team I went to film school with, so I've been with them for 30 years now. And everyone has ideas and everyone collaborates. Everyone says, what about this? What about this? And it was just fun. For 2 days we just got to have so much fun with the puppet, see what he could do. I really wanted him to dance. There was a scene that I really wanted him to dance. That was the hardest thing.
I bet. Yeah.
It took a lot to kind of to get him dancing. But then as soon as they locked into it, because it's 2 people controlling him, so
Right.
that's hard in itself to make something dance with 2 people. As soon as they locked into it, they had it bang on, like dancing bossa nova, and at one point, the puppeteer controlling his eyes just kind of put the eyelids down halfway, so it's like he was really kind of getting into it. It's so much fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my gosh. I for one am really glad that you went with the marionette. It's got a very charming element to it, just in the little bit that I've seen in the teaser, and unique, and bringing Peter on. Again, from the little bit that I've seen, he seems like he's done a really good job. And I know you'll get into this. There's an interview coming out later tonight with the One Ring, where you guys talk about the AI and stuff. And not to derail us too much, but I know you're going to cover that with them. I personally have tended to land on, I would much rather see other people take on roles than do like the deep fake stuff. Like you said, it kind of comes, it always, for me, always comes off on this weird uncanny valley. And I kind of look at it and I think, yeah, but it's not that like that person's gone. Like that's not really them. We're just kind of faking.
It's also, I mean, I think it's hugely disrespectful because it's making
Yeah.
assumptions about how they would portray that character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's absolute. Can you imagine someone doing that? Could you imagine that? I mean, after you're dead, maybe you don't care, but like, could you imagine someone just saying, "Well, we want your podcast to continue, so
Right.
we're just going to take it," and you just be going, well, "That's not what I would have done." Like,
Right.
that's. I can't help thinking that all of this stuff ends up being an impersonation.
Yeah.
And
Right.
AI is never gonna develop to the point where it can properly predict how someone will be. It'll always just bad impersonation.
Yeah. And I think, gosh, like Christopher, he did this for 8 decades, like you said. Like we have so much, thankfully, to go back and watch and everything, and to have some kind of imitation of him. It's not the real him, and like it kind of, the reason, not to get too philosophical, but the reason life is special is because it's finite, and
Absolutely. And also, there's also an argument to be said about, for God's sake, can we just move on? I mean, like, everything right now is, I mean, I get frustrated by the fact that, kids today are given Star Wars, which is a 40-year-old thing, They should be given their own Star Wars. There should be there should be something for them. The fact that we're still making Godzilla and King Kong films, and King Kong is from literally the birth of cinema from the 1950s and Godzilla from the 1950s, and it's just like, can't we just move on? Like, instead of, once someone's dead, let them be dead and let a new actor come in and be themselves and have a shot at creating their own cinematic legend. I definitely don't want to see films which are just populated by versions of dead people who would have done better things. And
right. Yeah.
And you forget that also, I mean, it's so disrespectful to boil them down to almost to a trope, because you look at Christopher Lee's career, and actually it was very varied, and he gave a lot of, I mean, there is the classic Christopher Lee that you can identify, but he gave a lot of really beautiful, nuanced performances in films that you wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
The film that he was the proudest of was a film called Jinnah, which hardly anyone's seen, which was a biopic about the guy who kind of created modern Pakistan, and it was the most significant film role that he had in the last half of his life, because he spent so much of his career doing quite short parts in films, and almost cameos, it felt like, most of the time. But that was one of the only films where he was in it beginning to end, and he was the main character. And he's lost in that part. He's in makeup, And I would argue that he's not recognizable as Christopher Lee. It's a wonderful performance. So, you know, I think, you know, that's what he was proudest of. So I think it would fill him with absolute loathing, the idea that someone would want to resurrect him and they'd probably just want him to be campy and be Dracula again.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
that would be the last thing that he would want.
Yeah. Well, I like I said, I'm glad you did the puppet for sure, and the bringing on Peter to do the voice. I think it's a really cool way to go about it, and you know, not faking anything, and just, you know, saying this is what it is. It's fun. We're doing this. And I will say, I think if down the line, if there's either a stretch goal or a merch item that you're looking to sell to people, I think a miniature version of the Christopher Lee puppet would be a great item to offer up.
It's funny you should say that, but if you buy the box set, the coffin box set, you get the head. We're doing Arch Model Studios. They've never done this before, but they're producing what's actually, we describe it as a death mask in the thing. It's actually going to be a bust. And it's going to be a bust of the puppet's head. It's going to be.
Oh.
So if you go onto Kickstarter now and go for the coffin box set, you're going to get that. And we're only making as many as we sell through Kickstarter.
Have orders, yeah.
So, you know, chances are there's going to be kind of less than 500 of these out there.
Wow.
A collector's item, and they're making them in-house at Arch Model Studios. So it's actually the people who made this who are making it.
That's
so
fantastic.
It's really special. So you can.
Yeah. And speaking of the Kickstarter, so we've, you know, talked a lot about the film. You know, the Kickstarter's been going on for a bit now. You've got 4 days left of it. You've got a couple stretch goals that you've hit. It's been going really well. You know, I've been keeping tabs on it. I was telling you before we started recording, I saw that, happened to come across this fairly early on and immediately backed it, because I just love the idea, for one, and the fact that you get, you know, this is the way you get a physical copy. You know, we were talking about that not really being a good option out there for distribution for this. And so doing a Kickstarter was a way for people to get their own copy of this. I'm a big believer, and I think, judging by your shelves, you're a big believer in physical media. So I just love that, you know, this Kickstarter is a way for people to get a physical copy of the film.
I mean, to be honest, they can get a download as well.
Yeah.
Even, like, you know, there's something for every kind of wallet. You know, there's a viewing party where you get to watch it with us live. You can download it. You can get the Blu-ray. You can get the deluxe Blu-ray, or you can get the box set, or you can become an executive producer. All these things, you know, you get your name on the film with these as well. And it's just so important. You know, we found as kind of independent documentary makers, we found that there's not a thirst out there to get kind of physical media of these things. They sell to the streaming platforms very quickly, and that's great. But, you know, like you say, I'm a collector, you're a collector, and everyone on our crew is collectors. And this film is so special to us that the idea of it not having a really great Blu-ray, just horrible, you know. So we're going all out with it, you know. We're going to there's so much more interview footage that's going to go on it. Like I said, we're going to put basically the whole Peter Jackson interview will be on there as an extra feature. Hopefully we'll get some kind of cut scenes and extended scenes and stuff in there as well. And then we've got these amazing artists. We've got Graham Humphreys, who is like the king of the British film poster. He's painted Christopher Lee more than any other artist.
Oh,
like,
interesting.
If you ever get kind of the Arrow Blu-rays, I think he does stuff at 88 Films as well, but all the boutique companies who put out the old Christopher Lee films, chances are it's Graham Humphreys who's done the cover for them.
Interesting.
So we're going to get him to do a really great kind of classic portrait. This amazing kind of folk artist called Johnny Greenteeth, who does beautiful kind of inspired by kind of like Wicker Man style prints. And Wicker Man was Christopher Lee's favorite film role. Favorite film that he did was Wicker Man. So we're doing a Wicker Man style kind of print with Johnny Greenteeth. We're doing a whole. There's a guy called Hey Kids Rock and Roll, and he makes kind of cardboard model kits. So we're going to have a cardboard model kit of Christopher Lee, like in his crypt kind of thing. so many. We've got Jonathan Rigby to do some new writing for the book that's going to be in the Blu-ray. We've got Dr. Jo Botting from the BFI. She's going to be writing pieces for that as well. Posters, stickers, badges. It's all going to come in a wood coffin, as you would hope.
Yeah.
Our aim is to make something beautiful for your shelf. You know,
Yeah.
you're a collector. You know what it's like.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then obviously you get the head in there as well. So
Yeah.
it's going to be amazing. It's going to be so cool. We like I say, we're geeks. We're physical media collectors. So we're putting together the box set that we would want.
Yeah.
And I think it's the box set that everyone wants. So it's going to be cool.
It's pretty darn cool. Yeah. Now, how has the reception been to this? You know, what were you expecting when you launched the Kickstarter, and how has that lived up to what your expectation was?
You never know what to expect.
Yeah.
I've done a bunch of stuff on Kickstarter. I think this is my 6th or 7th project, and half of them were films and half of them were books that I've kind of self-published. And you never know what the response is going to be at all. You just have to do your homework before you start it. You have to kind of, put your heart into it. I mean, I spent pretty much 2 months before we pushed the button on it, planning everything and making sure that it was all kind of watertight. And you're kind of you're at the mercy of the world, really. I mean, the thing that's great is that people like you have supported us, and kind of, given us kind of a platform with your fans, because know your fans are going to kind of love it as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what's always been nice. Is we've had a few kind of really helpful YouTubers who have been so excited about it, and have said, my people will want to know about this. And as soon as that happens, you just see a great big boost kind of coming. It's just like, the thing that's great now. I mean, so Kickstarter, a lot of people have not done Kickstarter before. They've not done crowdfunding. They don't necessarily know what it is, and see it as maybe a risk, as like, I'm giving money to something that might not happen. The thing that's great about this is that we've passed the target already. The film's already made. The film is done and finished. It's not about will this film ever get made, but we've passed the target. So the Blu-ray is happening.
Yeah.
So if you back it now, it's not a kind of like it was for the first week or two. Will this happen? I hope this happens.
Right.
It's now just turned into a pre-order. Like it's happening. We're only going to make basically as many as we can afford to from this campaign, as many people ordered. So you need to get on board, or you're not going to get it. Like it's that simple. Like it's just not going to happen. Not going to be in the shops. It's not going to be on Amazon. There might be, if we've got leftovers, surplus at the end, we might do it through our website. What the leftovers, but the box sets are going to be numbered, and it's going to be a true collector's edition. I think it looks like there's going to be kind of between 300 and 500 box sets. It's a really low run. So it's one of those things where also, buy 2, and in 6 months' time you can sell the other one on eBay. It's going to be one of those things. So now's the time.
Yeah, and like I said, guys, I am a big proponent of physical media. Like if there's a movie or TV show that comes out that I'm like, oh, I really enjoy this, I 100% buy the physical copy, because like, and I know people make fun of I think it wasn't it James Cameron who said something like they'll come and steal your movies in the middle of the night or something. But as someone who is often, at night winding down and I pull up a streaming service, like I get tired of, being recommended the same 12 things over and over again. And there's a whole wide world of film that, is somewhat in danger of being lost. Like there's so many movies that I pop into my mind randomly from my childhood that I'm like, oh, I want to show that to my kids. And you can't find, like, we have a bajillion streaming services and you can't find it anywhere. It's crazy. But thankfully I have this DVD in a cupboard in this storage cupboard that my wife gives me a hard time about still having these physical copies. And I say, this is why there's hundreds of DVDs back there.
Yeah, that's completely true. And there's another argument, which is actually this campaign has been so successful that me and Hank are starting to realize that we could actually start funding films this way as well.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where if you support independent filmmakers, if you deal with kind of Kickstarter, more films like this will be made.
Yeah.
You know, we won't be at the whims of the streamers and of their metrics and of the things that they think their audiences kind of want to see. The fact is, if we get, you know, I think we're up to about 700. If we get up to like 1,000 backers on this,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing stopping us next time from saying, okay, we don't even need to go to the streamers. Let's go straight to our audience, the people who've backed us before.
Yeah.
Let's see, how about this?
Yeah.
And so you'll get more interesting films. And if this is the kind of film you want to see, we're the ones who are making these kind of films. So get with us, you know, follow us on
Yeah.
social media and stuff, follow us on Kickstarter and be a part of it. You know, I mean, that's the fun thing as well, is that, you know, we update people as we go along on these projects. And those are, you can't see those updates unless you're a backer.
Right.
So, and everyone's going to get their names in the credits and stuff. So, you know, and we're doing screenings. Well, there'll be some actual physical screenings around the world as well in cinemas, where we hope to get to meet everybody.
Very cool.
So it's, you know, get involved, be a part of it. It's really good fun.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I mean, especially with the, you know, the physical edition too, you get the bonus features. Like I'm excited to watch like all the stuff that you interviewed Peter Jackson about that didn't make the cut. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of Lord of the Rings fans out there that would be very interested in that bonus feature.
Definitely. And
Which,
don't expect it to crop up on YouTube because I'm very tight on copyright infringements.
yeah, right.
Whenever we've done stuff before, like the extra features always get ripped and put onto YouTube.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen.
Not gonna happen. So get the Blu-ray, folks.
Yeah.
Now I am curious, like, you know, you mentioned how much extra footage you have just from the interviews, but I think someone like Christopher Lee over, you know, like we said, 8 decades, has done so many interviews. How do you even begin, like when you're starting this film, how do you even begin to sift through all of what you have, you know, at your fingertips and what goes into this film?
There's always kind of a first point of guard, which we've worked for the last couple of projects with the British Film Institute, who have been amazing. So Sarah Currant, the head librarian there, she was great. So she had done the research into what I should read, so I didn't have to go wading into just the whole archive. She was the one who kind of went through and gave me a pile of stuff. And Jo Botting as well, who's a consultant. She works for BFI as a curator, so she had also done similar. And Frances Idden, who's the head of, I think the head of special collections there, she was, you know, she immediately said, well, we've got Christopher Lee's scrapbooks, we've got his personal scrapbooks that he kept about his career, with his writing and with his kind of photos and stuff. So there are people, the BFI were very supportive in that way. Also, John Carino, who works in the footage department, he was someone who found us great footage. So that's the beginning. And then it's doing everything you possibly can in the time that you've got. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, I would love to be able to spend 3 years making a movie, you know, and travel the world's film archives and find all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, it wasn't possible. It was good to be able to watch stuff. One thing that was slightly frustrating is that it's very hard to license all the footage that you want to use in a film like this.
Yeah.
Not even just because of budget, but just because finding out who owns these licenses can be tricky. And then they often don't reply to you. You know, they don't have the facilities within their own kind of organization to license it to you. So, you know, that I knew early on that I wanted to kind of create the narration, because I knew that it wouldn't be possible just to fill it with footage of him in interviews, you know. One thing that we discovered that we've used in the film, which was incredible, was a documentary that was made while he was making he did a version of Dracula with Jess Franco in Italy, and which is not the best film, but it's an interesting film. But there was a documentary called Umbracal, which was filmed kind of behind the scenes, and it's not really a making of, because it's real gonzo 60s experimental kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there was so much fun footage that we've got in the film of it's something that's in the trailer, of just Christopher Lee messing about on sets and seeing a kind of unguarded side of him, and an amazing piece of footage, which part of it is in the trailer, of him just in an empty theater singing opera, you know.
Oh, yeah.
He was, that was what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to be an opera singer. That was his greatest regret, that he wasn't a professional opera singer. So, yeah, I don't know. You get whatever you can from whatever sources you can, and you just immerse yourself in it. I
Yeah.
mean, I think I've seen at least half of his films now. And
Wow.
that is not a good thing. Because he made some stinkers. He was always great in them, but some of these films were just immeasurably bad films. And the weird thing about his career is you can't even look at it and go, "Oh, this was a bad phase." Like,
Yeah.
he literally would make an incredible film, and then the next film he'd make would be dog turd. I mean,
Yeah.
it was amazing. And part of you just goes, did he have an agent? Like, was he reading these scripts? I think he was actually an optimist. I think that he looked at these projects for what their potential was.
Right.
And he didn't know that that the budgets were going to be slashed, or that directors just weren't going to be very good. And like I say, he brings his A game every time. In
Yeah.
everything I've seen him in some really bad films, and he is never less than captivating.
Wow.
So it's really a testament to him. So there's you see a lot of clips. We've got a lot of clips in there of sadly we couldn't license some of his very worst films, because who knows where the rights are on these.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's impossible to track down. So yeah, but there's a lot of stuff out there, and I know a lot of people love crazy cinema, and I urge you to just track down these. They're fun. I mean, try and see if you can get a copy of Starship Invasions or Jaguar Lives, and you won't regret it.
There you go. There's some films to seek out for those really looking to dive in the deep end, I guess we could say. Now I'm imagine a big question will be, when do you expect this film to be released, or Blu-rays to go out, or did people to have access to watch it?
We're going to deliver in November.
November. Okay.
So we want everyone to have their physical stuff by Christmas, definitely, kind of wherever
Right.
you are in the world. It's gonna. We work with Sky on this one. So in the UK, it's going to show on Sky kind of around Halloween.
Okay.
And they're actually programming a fantastic Christopher Lee program around it. They're getting loads of his films to kind of show around it.
Oh,
So
cool.
I think what we'll do is wait until it's kind of shown on Sky. Have had their kind of release of it.
Mhm.
And then we'll put it out into the world and get it all sent out. But it's all, like I say, the film itself is done. It's finished.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got plenty of time to kind of put this all together. And in fact, most of it's in motion already anyway. But yeah, we'll definitely be delivering in November.
Very cool. Now, last question for you. What do you, as you look at this completed film and the life of this incredible actor that we all have seen and love his performances, what do you hope people walk away with after watching this film?
Well, like I said, I really I hope people relate it to themselves, and that it kind of it humanizes him and makes you realize that his whole ethos, he really didn't think anyone was better than anybody else. He didn't buy into the notion of kind of celebrity in that way. He was very egalitarian. He would talk to anyone. He would spend time with anyone. He was polite and courteous to everybody. And I think also, I think there's something to be said for people who work in the creative industries, which I'm sure you're surrounded by as well. It's very easy to look at your career and kind of stress out about it and kind of expect kind of more and kind of hope for more. And I think that he's kind of a lasting testament to the idea of just getting on and working, And the fact is that can be how you create your legacy, is by just working, by not stopping, by keeping going, by working earnestly, by treating people well. Then maybe your story comes together at the end like his did. He's someone who in the middle part of his career was very frustrated with his career, very upset. He didn't think he was a star. He didn't like the stuff that he was famous for. He wasn't getting roles that he felt kind of stretched him. But because he never gave up, because he just kept working, and he kept working earnestly and giving good performances and working with people in a way that people wanted to work with him, that he had this wonderful moment at the end of his career where he suddenly did get everything he wanted. Suddenly the world, shifted on its axis slightly, and I don't know whether he ever realized. I know that even to the day he died, he wasn't comfortable with his kind of past, with the hammer and with all of those kind of things. But he created a legacy. His work is a legacy, and like you say, these lists keep coming out. He had an incredible life, an incredible career, and that's because he worked earnestly, he did good work, and he never gave up. And I think there's something that we can all definitely learn from that.
Absolutely. Well, I am certainly looking forward to the film. I can't wait to see it. Guys, go back it on Kickstarter. The link is in the live chat. I'll make sure it's in the description and everything as well. Get your own copy so you can watch it whenever you feel like, and you can get those sweet bonus features that we've been talking about. Things like Peter Jackson's extended interview moments. If there's anything Lord of the Rings fans like, it's an extended edition, and so we can get that even longer bits of interview with Peter Jackson. It'll be fantastic. John, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about Christopher Lee and his life in the documentary with us today.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. It's been wonderful.
Well, guys, again, go check it out on Kickstarter, back it, get your own copy of the Blu-ray. Again, it is The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee, one of the most legendary. Like I said, everyone has a Christopher Lee story that I've talked to around the Lord of the Rings films, and I'm sure that's the same across all of Hollywood. So, go back the documentary. It sounds like a great fun time diving into the life of Christopher Lee. Thanks again, John, for joining us, and we will see you all next time on Nerd of the Rings.